Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that the information in this presentation is not to be or construed as investment advice. The information presented are subject to change without notice, and while we have made every reasonable effort to ensure that the content is reliable and accurate, we have not independently verified the content and are not responsible for errors therein. Please consult a professional advisor before putting a loonie in any of these financial markets. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the IceCap Canadian Market Wrap with me, Richard Diaz. One of my favorite parts of this job is to challenge and dispel myths and narratives popular in the macroeconomic and related political landscape. And so in that spirit, this week's episode is going to be about coal, or rather, the naive view that it's on the decline. And I want to give a special shout out to Xavier Blais from Bloomberg for his ongoing work on this subject, and for one of the charts you'll see in this week's video. As usual, this week's episode will be split into a couple of sections, so let's get started. Energy consumption is rising. In which should surprise nobody, global electricity demand is rising as more of the world develops and continues to electrify everything. The center of this electricity boom is Asia, as you can see from the chart. This is in part why the world's two largest countries by population and the largest coal consumers, China and India, are not abandoning coal, but are actually building more coal-fired power plants. We will, of course, expand on this a little bit later. First, let's provide some context and frame up why countries are consuming more energy writ large. There is a positive relationship between energy and economic growth. Nowhere in the world is there a wealthy country that consumes only a little bit of energy, or a poor country that consumes a lot. But is this the result of energy-inducing economic growth, or of wealthier countries demanding more services that require energy? It's likely both. And given that the causality can run both ways, mounting evidence suggests that energy consumption is a necessary enabler and driver of economic growth. Something else to keep in mind is the energy mix. The acceleration isn't just about artificial intelligence and data centers, as is often talked about. If anything, they would account for only a fraction of the increase in consumption. Demand for power is coming across from everywhere, noticeably electric vehicles, air conditioning, and even water desalination. The fact of the matter is energy per person, in Asia especially, is rising, as this chart shows. For these nearly 5 billion people, as their economies develop, so will their energy consumption. Interesting to note on this chart are the laggards, specifically Africa, which is slightly down from its peak as it struggles to meet its development goals. And then there's Indonesia, which has a huge population and has seen its energy consumption pop as they've entered into the energy transition supply chain in a real way with, for example, the refining of nickel. And finally, with India, with its 1.4 billion people, now the largest population in the world, starting to accelerate its energy consumption. Zooming out on the per capita data can give us some perspective on what the end game might or might not be. Relative to the United States or Canada, per capita consumption is actually still quite low. And you can take this to mean two things. Asia may close the gap. That rise will mean a huge increase in global energy demand. Or you could say that due to geography, cold weather, etc., that gap might actually never close. The truth is the answer is probably somewhere in between. Either way, it's clear the direction of travel is for more energy demand, certainly over the short term. So how is China and the rest of Asia planning to meet this growing energy demand? And the answer is something that no one seems to like: coal. But isn't China a leader in the world's energy transition? And yes, in many ways, this is undoubtedly true. China is building twice as many utility-scale wind and solar farms as the rest of the world combined. And renewables, which include hydropower and geothermal, now make up 16% of their energy mix, up from about 5% 2 decades ago. They also lead the world in exporting wind turbines, batteries, and other types of renewable tech. However, what is really important to note is that China is still totally dependent on coal. Much of this talk of the relative progress China has made totally hides the reality of, and what I think is far more important, and that's the absolute number. And I think that this chart is damning. Not only is coal the lion's share of China's electricity, but it's rising, not falling or even flat. What is more is that China accounted for 95% of the world's new coal power construction activity in 2023, according to the latest annual report by the Global Energy Monitor. Construction began on 70 gigawatts of new capacity in China. That's up fourfold since 2019. This compares with less than 4 gigawatt of new coal power construction starting in the rest of the world. New capacity also came online in Indonesia, India, Vietnam, and Japan, and on it goes. Furthermore, both Indonesia and India have made it explicit coal is part of their economic development plans going forward. The reality is, as we can see, the Canadians have been sold a lie. Asia is not at all decarbonizing. There are currently 982 new coal-fired power plants under construction. So why are these countries doubling down on coal? Firstly, and this message is for the Google censors, I am not defending coal. To the contrary, what I am doing is outlining on the slide the simple reality of the situation and why coal is so popular in the first place. Without this basic understanding, we cannot have an adult conversation about coal. For the rest of you, coal is so damn popular because it is abundant and accessible. It's everywhere and relatively easy to get to. It's cheap to extract and to transport. It's energy dense and it's reliable. And finally, there's a plethora of heavy industrial applications for it. Unfortunately, coal is the worst form of energy in terms of carbon emissions. This chart and thousands other like it make it very clear. If your goal is to lower global emissions, burning coal is the worst form of energy. Finally, this last chart shows us again that we've been lied to. The issue of global emissions will not be solved in Europe or North America, no matter how many carbon taxes we levy or the ongoing self-flagellation we see all over Europe. Asia is where this problem will be met head on. Unfortunately, as we've seen from today's presentation, this is not at all going the direction that people want, and it's largely due to the fact that they continue to rely on and invest in coal. So that's a wrap on this week's episode. Thanks very much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and follow for more. And as always, feel free to get in touch with me about any questions or comments or concerns you have with the show. And I'll see you next time.